So let's move on to some Psychic types. We have Haunter and Gengar, two very interesting cards. Again, it's these evolutions that keep popping up being interesting in this set. Haunter has 70 HP, kind of low for a stage 1, but has an interesting ability, Gothic Fear. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve, you leave both active Pokemon poisoned. Confused, sorry. Confused, which is pretty interesting. Looking at the Gengar straight away, it has free retreat, so it's quite easy to get out of confusion yourself. Also, of course, you can evolve your way out of confusion as well. So, pretty interesting. Leaving your opponent confused is kind of annoying, and kind of combos nicely with the Gengar as well. That's why I thought I'd show him off. He does have the Poison Ring attack as well. Not too often you'll be attacking with Haunter, but Haunter's probably going to be like a 2-of in your Gengar-based deck, while you still have a bunch of candies. Poison Ring, for one Psychic and one Colourless. Bear in mind we do have Dimension Valley for Psychic types. Your opponent's active is now poisoned, and they can't retreat, so it does combo quite nicely with the ability. You leave them confused, poisoned, and they can't retreat. It's kind of nice. Fairly locky and pretty interesting there. On its own, it could even work fairly nicely with a Vileplume. I think that's kind of fun to try out. Although it doesn't do too much damage. It's if the attack did some damage, it would be pretty good for that sort of thing. So probably just attacking the Gengar deck anyway. But yeah, Gengar stage 2 with 130 HP. That's pretty decent, Psychic type, like we say, free retreat is nice. Having resistance to fighting is pretty interesting as well. It has two pretty good attacks. The first one is Sinister Fog. Again, you leave your opponent's active poisoned, and you snipe 1 damage to everything on your opponent's bench. Or you place a counter, sorry. So it does get around Mr. Mime. But yeah, not too good. We have better snipers, basically. Better spread damage Pokemon, so not too helpful. But the second attack is the one that's very, very crucial. And that's Creepshow. For one Psychic, one Colourless, again, Dimension Valley can help us out here. So a single energy attachment. If your opponent's active has 3 or more damage counters on it, that Pokemon is knocked out. That is pretty OP, in my opinion. Very, very strong. It reminds me of the Gardevoir level X that allowed you to just straight up knock out the thing with the lowest HP on board. Here, we pretty much just need to get 3 counters on something, and we can just kill it. That's pretty awesome. We, of course, have bats, so 2 Golbats or a single Crobat is all you need to kill anything in your opponent's active position. That's pretty good, I'd say. So you have the bats for if you're against non-EX Pokemon, you can start sniping away and just killing them anyway, maybe even using Sinister Fog to spread it all around. And if you're against big old EXs, you're going to just use 1 Crobat or a couple of Golbat drops to use Creepshow and just take away 2 prizes for a single energy. That seems very, very efficient and very good. But let's not get carried away here. Having 2 stage 2 lines in your deck is going to be pretty clunky. You need to have thick bat lines as well as a thick Gengar line to get this working. But the trade-off is you don't need too many energy in the deck. I'd probably just say 6 or 7 to try and be cheeky, using the Dimension Valley as well. So in an ideal world, you're just killing EX Pokemon. Of course, you could have a few Lysanders in here, so you could bat drop Lysander and then Creepshow to kill stuff like Shaymins and stuff. So it seems like it could be very, very good here. I really need to test this out because I've not played 2 stage 2s in a while, and I know it can get quite clunky at times, but we do have the supporter Bridget to flood our bench with Ghastlies and Zubats in the early turns. And we have a lot of ball search right now, Level Ball, Ultra Ball of course, Repeat Ball even can be helpful with all these bats in here, so I feel like just flooding your deck with these Pokemon and search cards, having very, very few other cards that you need. Basically a load of search and then Dimension Valleys and supporters. That's all you need, really. So one that I definitely would like to try out, and it's pretty a concept we haven't seen for a while, doing this, just force a knockout rather than actually doing damage to take prizes. It's pretty cool to see. Next up we have Mewtwo EXs, and these are pretty big parts of the set. The first Mewtwo I'll talk about is on the left. They're both 170 HP Psychics, but the one on the left has Shatter Shot, which does 30 damage times the number of Psychic Energy attached to this Pokemon. So a turn 130 is pretty okay. That can stack up a little bit quite quickly against non-EXs, I guess that's useful. And bearing in mind there are Megas to come, so this is probably the more aggressive of the 2 Mewtwo's that we have, because its output can get stronger as we attach to it. It also has this very cool second attack called Damage Change for 2 Psychic and a Colourless. Bearing in mind, of course, Dimension Valley as always. You get to switch all damage counters on this Pokemon with those on your opponent's active Pokemon. So the ideal situation is you're up against something like a Giratina or maybe a Manectric. They've come in and hit you for, say, 110 or 100 damage, and they have completely clean, no damage on them. You get to damage change, you receive 0 damage, they take those 100 damage that you've just had, and you get to plonk it on them instead. So it's a pretty good way of protecting Mewtwo, I guess. So if your opponent isn't going to one-shot Mewtwo, they have to be careful because they could be falling into a damage change trap. So I feel like this is probably the best one to use, actually. Basically forces your opponent to either not attack you or to one-hit you, which is a pretty cool thing. It's almost like having Outrage, but it's even better because you get to switch it. The worry is, of course, if they already have damage counters on them, they're not worried about damage change because it's not going to affect you too much. Maybe you heal 20 damage and deal 20 to them, but that's not strong at all, really. So in the ideal situation, they have no damage, you've just been hit in the face, you get to damage change it. So something to look out for when you're playing against this Mewtwo. It's not just always going to go into the Mega Evolution straight away, because if you play into that damage change, it can really punish you. They get to heal, you straight away get, half your damage taken away, so it's a pretty good attack there. The second Mewtwo, it has some interesting attacks as well. The first is Photon Wave for a double colourless. Sorry about the artwork as well. It's the only scan that Bulbapedia had in English, unfortunately. But this is the secret rare, the gold one. I think there's a different secret rare for the other Mewtwo, just to the left of it. They look pretty cool though. Photon Wave does 30, and during your opponent's next turn, any damage by attacks is reduced by 30. And that's before applying weakness and resistance as well, so that's something to bear in mind. So if Mewtwo will start becoming a big thing, this Mewtwo might be the preferable one, because you get to deal damage quite early on, and also reduce damage done to yourself in response. That way you can commit energy without worrying about being knocked out the following turn. So helping you sort of tank and stay alive while you search for your Mega Evolution. It also has Psyburn, 2 Psychic and 2 Colourless. It seems too expensive, but it is a vanilla 120. I don't think it's all that good. Like I say, the damage change Mewtwo is probably my favourite one to use. And Shatter Shot is also a decent attack, but if Mewtwo will start getting huge, you might want to switch to the Photon Wave Mewtwo. Also bear in mind that in Expanded, we still have the X-Ball Mewtwo, and I think that does outclass both the others that we're looking at right here. Let's look at the Megas now. By far my favourite is the one on the left here. It does have less HP, just 210, but for a double colourless energy, this attack is pretty cool. Psychic Infinity does a base of 10, but you do 30 more times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. And it's not affected by weakness as well, so don't worry, there's not going to be Mewtwo wars for days. I guess non-EX Mewtwo's can attack into this one quite nicely, but against Mega v Mega, it's not based on weakness, so that's something they've tried to address quite clearly. But yeah, 30 damage times the amount of energy, so basically if you have a double colourless on, that's a base of 70 before you've considered, you attaching more energy to yourself, or your opponent even having energy on them. And of course there's the Magnezone that can flood energy to Mewtwo, we have Bronzong to use Metal Links, and just being a double colourless energy means this is quite a splashable card, really. Even playing just a 1-1 Mewtwo can punish quite a few things for having a high energy count on them. So yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty good card. I don't think it's going to have its own deck. Well, you know what? It probably could have its own deck, just because it's a pretty decent attack. But I think it is outclassed by other Mega Evolutions we have. Like, looking at, like, Houndoom can discard energy from itself. Manectric only needs 2 energy attached, so a lot of the time Mewtwo has to commit a lot to start getting like one-shots. For the most part, you're best off using other EXs, but it is a psychic type. It can hit Lucario for weakness, which is something to worry about because Luke Bats is fairly playable right now, but of course they can play Sash anyway and stuff like that. I don't want to get into it, but yeah, Mewtwo, decent typing, weakness to basically itself, but not the actual Mega in response, so it's going to be interesting how this card plays out. The other Mega Mewtwo EX is pretty much garbage, I'm not going to lie. It's one for collectors, really. 230 HP is nice, but the attack, I mean, just look at the cost already. you're basically just slapping your head, just thinking, why have they made this the attack cost? One psychic, 2 fighting, and a colourless. Wow, that's a lot of commitment, and it's to a Mega Pokemon. It does 150 base, which, yeah, fair enough, it's good damage. And if there's a stadium, it does 50 more damage. And it's not affected by resistance or any other effects. 200 is good for that sort of energy requirement, and for, it is a Mega Pokemon. You really need to be hitting, at least to knock out everything in your path. 200, it's the same as like a Groudon, but they at least have strong energy and fighting stadium. Mewtwo's a psychic type, so we don't even have that available to us. It seems way too clunky in my opinion. I challenge someone to make it work, but I really think the Mewtwo to the left, I think that's the Y version, is the better one to look at. So yeah, a couple of interesting Mewtwo's there. The one on the left, probably the one you're going to see more of overall. Next up we have an interesting Stage 1. This is Mismagius. It's a 90 HP Psychic, and it has, I think it's called Twisted Dimension, the ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve, you may have your opponent shuffle his or her hand into their deck and draw for each of their remaining prize cards. That may sound familiar because it is the effect of N. The issue is it's only when you play it, and N was a card that, we had VS Seeker available, and obviously we could play 4 of them and just hold them in hand. It seems that Mismagius is a bit more clunky. You need to have it at the right time, not only when you're down on prizes and your opponent has a good hand. You also need to search Mismagius at the right time. Also, it's Hex Maniacable. If they just see a Misdreavus on the bench and they start going crazy for prizes, they could just use a Hex Maniac to sort of cover themselves. So I feel like it's kind of clunky. Also, it fills up a bench spot, clearly inferior to N. But then again, N could sometimes just win you games flat out. So I guess if you are a disruption deck, and definitely a slower setup deck, Mismagius might be an interesting 1-1 inclusion to try and swing your game back in your favour. Overall, I don't think it's going to see too much play. It just seems kind of too clunky for me. Next up, we have a basic Psychic type, Cresselia, 110 HP, has an ability called My Way. If there's a stadium, it has a free retreat cost, which is kind of nice, and its attack is a Psychic and double colourless energy. It does 70 base damage, which is kind of annoying, but this is a non-EX Psychic type, so we need to bear in mind we've got to start thinking about Mewtwo EX counters, because Mewtwo is weak to Psychics. So having a Cresselia with Muscle Band does hit 180, which is pretty cool. You get to heal 20 to yourself, which isn't too relevant. But this might be a splashable card. We have to think about Smeargle, at all times, basically. I feel like there will be some sort of boxy builds where you just play DCEs, maybe some Bronzongs, and then have 3 or 4 tech attackers with different energy. So you use Smeargle to attach to the thing that you need at the right time. And Cresselia might fall into that category because it can hit 180 on Mewtwo's for a non-EX, which is pretty cool. So I think it's one to look out for. Nothing too impressive. There's probably better Psychic types to deal with Mewtwo anyway. But, it's a new one that I'd like to check out. And that ability makes it slightly better, slightly more splashable. So it's one to consider. Now let's look at some fighting types. And when we look at fighting types, we have to remember there's the Karina engine, which makes it so much better. There's obviously Strong Energy to increase our output, Focus Sash to make it more survivable, Stadium as well, the Fighting Stadium to increase our output even further, and there's of course Muscle Bands, so it may not look like these cards are doing too much damage, but believe me, that can stack up. Marowak has 100 HP for a fighting type, pretty okay for a Stage 1. Has 2 attacks, the first is a 30 damage snipe, but it can also be to the active as well, so that can be increased by Strong Energy and stuff, which is pretty decent. And you also have Bone Windmill, which for an extra colourless energy, you get to do 60. If your opponent's an EX, you get to switch to the bench as well. So it's like a bit of a Donphan, but only to EXs, which is kind of a shame. You'd want it to do it every time just to be consistent and to help you out against, these stuff like Night Marches where they're just going to start running through you, and even Vespiquen to some extent. So it's kind of a shame that Bone Windmill doesn't always do that. But against EXs, you're still having that strategy. Like I say, Focus Sash can sort of help you out against the non-EX decks anyway. So I think it is a kind of decent attack overall. And we also have this Break Evolution, which I think is a very playable card. It increases Marowak's HP by 40. Going up to 140 is, pretty respectable. Assuming this is pretty much a Stage 2 now. 140 is pretty standard. And we have Bone Revenge. for the same cost as Bone Windmill, which is kind of cool. Just 2 energy, you get to do 20 and 40 more for each prize card your opponent has taken. So if your opponent's taken 4 prizes, you're doing 180. If they've taken 5, you get to kill pretty much any Mega in format right now, other than the absolutely huge ones like Groudon. So this is really, really nice. I think having a focus-sashed Marowak break in the mid to late game is going to be absolutely devastating. You pretty much guarantee yourself 3-4 prizes with this Bone Revenge. Like I say, if you have that sash and it can remain on board. So even playing 1 break, like I keep saying, just playing the 1 can really swing a game for you. And again, 140 HP keeps you out of range of stuff like Manectric and Giratina, which makes it so much more painful for them to deal with. So I think this combination, definitely the break is a huge, huge threat for you. So even if you are quite slow setting up with Marowak, putting these snipes around the board, sort of windmilling, stalling a little bit here and there, once those prizes start to rack up for your opponent, assuming you're playing a mainly non-EX deck, maybe using Hawluchas to take early prizes, and then while you start losing prizes, you can switch it up to Marowak Break and get those big Bone Revengers going in. I think it can be a pretty decent strategy overall. Next up we have the Mamoswine Evolution line, and it's a pretty interesting one. I don't think it's all that playable, but interesting nonetheless. I'm actually looking at Piloswine's second attack, and that's Gathering Footsteps, which does 30 plus 10 more for each colourless in the retreat cost of all of your Swinub, Piloswine and Mamoswine in play. Pretty interesting. Swinub only has 1 retreat, Piloswine has 2, and Mamoswine has a chunky 4 retreat. That's actually why I've thrown the Mamoswine in here. You can combine that with Shrine of Memories, so you're straight away off the bat doing base 70. That's if you have just 1 Mamoswine in play. And consider the fact that you can have Strong Energy, Muscle Band, Fighting Stadium, and you're more than likely going to have multiple Swinub and Piloswine on the bench. That's actually going to rack up to some big, big damage. We do have the Team Aqua's Muck, which adds 1 colourless to every Pokemon's retreat cost. So again, this can get pretty huge pretty quickly. This feels like it has a sort of, almost like a round deck with the old round Seismitoad and all the Meloettas and stuff. This Piloswine deck seems very familiar. It's kind of a convoluted strategy to get big output from non-EXs. It does seem like a lot of setup. You do have Karina to start searching out these Piloswines and Swinubs quite easily though. So it feels like it could work in some aspects. I think it's one to play around with. You do have Focus Sash to try and keep Piloswine alive as well. Keep all your Pokemon alive basically to maintain our output and also make this 2 energy, or the 3 energy cost I should say, but basically 1 fighting energy and a double colourless, seem kind of cheaper so that you actually keep it around. Definitely weak to hammers and weak to Trainer Lock as well, but it seems like a fun one and again one to play around with. Next up we have, I think it's a pretty bold statement, but I think this is my favourite Pokemon in the set, just for the creativity and the potential power this card has. Gallade is a stage 2 fighting type, and straight away this should be ringing some bells for Max's Hidden Ball Trick, and absolutely that's the way I'm thinking about this card, being a great tech for certain decks. 150 HP is huge for a stage 2, well, it's big for a stage 2, it's pretty annoying for things. It has an amazing ability and an amazing attack. So first of all, let's look at Premonition. So if you want to use Max's Hidden Ball Trick just as a bench sitter, like we saw in the past some Night March decks like to use Empoleon for diving search, you could try and use Max's Gallade now, because Premonition allows you to look at the top 5 and put them in any order that you like. This combines really nicely with Unknown, because Farewell Letter can basically be like a mini computer search from the top 5, which is pretty awesome. And if you're playing a Maxi style build, Unknown is actually very helpful as well, because it's an instant -1 from hand at times, but also it can draw you more cards to try and get the Maxi combo going. So it seems like Unknown is going to be very helpful for helping you find the Maxi, but then in the mid to late game when Gallade's already out there, you get basically mini computer searches from whatever unknowns you have remaining, which seems really, really good. Also in Expanded, it could really combo nicely with Ether. Ether is like a very forgotten card. Everyone sort of hyped it when it was first released, and then the hype pretty much went away immediately. But Gallade with the Premonition makes it a lot more consistent, almost to the point where you're always getting the Ether combo off, which can really help out decks that don't have acceleration, like fighting decks. So maybe even Landorus. I remember when Ether was first hyped, Landorus EX was the main target for it. So in Expanded, this Gallade could be absolutely amazing for Landorus. Again, it's one of those cards that can use Focus Sash and stuff to really benefit from it. So it seems like that's going to work out. But that's not all. Gallade also has a very powerful attack, and that is Sensitive Blade. It does 60, and if you play the supporter during this turn, you do 70 more damage for just a double colourless. So 130 is great numbers. This is going to be a glorified Manectric EX killer. Basically any deck that struggles with Manectric, just sort of build your deck around Archies. That's why I've got Yveltal around here on the right. I feel like this is the new partner for Yveltal EX, almost like a revival for Yveltal, because at the moment it really struggles against Mega Man. So here we can have Max's Gallade in here. You're already playing DCEs with Yveltal. You can Y-Cyclone onto Gallade even, and then you can start swinging and killing Mega Mans and make that matchup actually quite favourable for you, which is absolutely awesome. You have to play a supporter each turn, but, you know, if you're playing your deck well, you know, you should be doing that most turns. And Yveltal is definitely a deck that has the space for the Max's combo. We've seen it already in Expanded, use it for Archeops, so I don't see why we can't build a Max's build in Standard for this Gallade. It's definitely one I want to try out, and I'm very happy to start testing this Gallade. I think it's a very powerful card. Like I say, one of the best we have in format. One of the things we do have to worry about, though, it is a Psychic weak Pokemon, so against these Mewtwo's it's going to get eaten alive. But again, it's a non-EX, so if they want to Lysander this up, you know, there's things that you can deal with. Like, if you're playing Yveltal, you have fairly good matchups against Mewtwo anyway, because you're Y-Cycloning your energy around, making it so that you don't have much on you. And if they start committing, you have Evil Ball anyway. So the more I talk about this card, the more I really love Gallade. I think it's a fantastic card. A lot of combo options there. It's a consistency booster at the worst of times, and at the best of times, it's going to win you a Mega Manectric matchup. So that's pretty awesome in my opinion. Next up, we have another interesting fighting type. It's going to be Meloetta. 90 HP fighting type, so super searchable with both Karina and Level Ball. It has Accelerating Spin, which allows you to attach 2 fighting cards from your discard pile to this Pokemon, and then you get to switch to the bench to sort of hide for a little bit. Pretty interesting card. You get to protect your Meloetta a little bit, maybe throw in a Robo-Sub for the early turns to sort of stall while you set up these Meloettas. Again, you have all the fighting toys available. I basically wouldn't even discuss this card if we didn't have the fighting toys, because otherwise it is very mediocre. But the second attack is Prima Rondo. Don't really know what that means. But it's 60 plus 50 if you have a Psychic Energy attached. So it seems like you're going to play mostly Psychic Energy and then have like Battle Compressors to get rid of fightings. So that when you use Accelerating Spin, it's actually with a basic Psychic Energy, so that you set up that second attack in just your own first attack. So it seems like it's kind of annoying that you have to set yourself up. It's quite expensive otherwise. Because, yeah, you could say, oh, just fighting DCE, but then you're just doing 60, which does really suck. So it feels like you have to keep setting up Meloettas yourself with Accelerating Spin, which is kind of irritating. But I guess if you're playing enough Robo-Subs, it sort of works in your favour, I guess. Overall, yeah, like I say, I'm only discussing it because there's so many fighting toys. Someone can make this work just because of the amount of good fighting support we have. You do have to bear in mind, though, that there's so many very, very good fighting types that I don't really see Meloetta being the best one. So you're probably better off playing the other more established fighting types like Hawlucha and stuff like that. But it's a nice non-EX attacker, so it can help you get around stuff like Regice, I guess, for certain decks. But yeah, one to consider, I'd say. Next up, one of the best cards in the set, or the combination of cards in the set, we have Zoroark. Zoroark is a stage 1 dark type with 100 HP. It's pretty mediocre, but it does have the ability Stand-In. Once during a turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may switch this Pokemon with your active. So the return of Rushin, this time it's on a stage 1. It's yet really to sink into how much worse this is than just a basic. Obviously, playing a single Keldeo, if you're already playing a couple of Floatstone, was absolutely amazing. Now, it feels like playing a 1-1 Zoroark is kind of techy. You might have to fit in a 2-2, which does seem kind of clunky, but for these dedicated decks like Bronzong, you're probably going to need to have the Rushin in there to really help you out. So definitely a godsend for those sorts of decks. It's just, Playing a 1/1 seems kind of annoying because you can prize parts of it, and that's really going to suck for your strategy. But definitely a strong ability. We know it's really good. And he also has a pretty decent attack as well. Kind of situational, but just a DCE, so splashable as well. 10 damage base, and you do 30 more for each of your opponent's bench. And this can obviously get pretty big. For the most part, he's going to have a floatstone on him, so you don't have to really consider muscle band math. But for a non-EX attacker that you already play in your deck, being a means around getting a means of getting around Regice and stuff like that, it's going to be really, really nice for you. So I think Zoroark will see quite a lot of play in the standard format. Obviously in expanded, I still think Keldeo is far superior, despite its attack being worse than Zoroark's. And then looking at Zoroark Break as well, if you want to get really techy, maybe you play a 2-2 line of Zoroark and then like a single Zoroark Break. 140 HP, and you have a single Dark Energy to do foul play, and you get to choose your opponent's active, one of their attacks, and use it as your own. This really can be good, really can be bad. Depends what gets played in the format right now. Like if you start playing against Mega Rayquazas, stuff like that, it can be pretty good. Being able to Turbo Blaze for just one Dark Energy seems absolutely insane. Again, if you're using Chaos Wheel, so many different reasons why this could be great. But when you start thinking about, okay, what if I play against the Gengar and I don't have any damage on the opponent, it really doesn't do anything. But, you know, at the worst of times, it's a buff of HP for your bench tech. So I feel like playing one Zoroark Break in some of the decks that you're playing. Of course, it has to have Dark Energy involved to actually get the effect of foul play off. So might want to play one Break Evolution in your Yveltal build. But overall, I think just the Stage 1 Zoroark is the one that I'm mostly excited about. So next up we have another Yveltal to add to the mix. It's a 130 HP Dark type, much similar to its old one. It has the ability Fright Night, and as long as this Pokemon is your active, each Pokemon tool card has no effect. So pretty interesting, kind of weird. It's like the Bayonet that we have, but it has to be active, so it's kind of worse, I guess, unless you're using this guy as an attacker. It's not like you'd use this with something that switches to the bench like a Mien Shao or anything, because the effect doesn't seem that good. But obviously making stuff like Flowstone that just goes offline, making Muscle Band not work, making it difficult to kill the Yveltal seems pretty cool in my opinion. And this Pinch Black Spear is an interesting attack as well. For a Dark Double Colorless you do 60 and 60 to one of your opponent's bench DX. I think this, you know, it could even be quite decent. Putting some counters on the active, you know, up to 80 if you have Muscle Band, and 60 to a bench. That's two-shotting Shamans on the bench, whilst you're also pressuring the active. Bearing in mind, they don't have Muscle Band support, thanks to Fright Night stopping it. Actually, no, you can't use Muscle Band on your own, so the Pitch Black Spear will only do 60 to the active, so probably like three-shotting their attacking EXs, but you're also threatening Shamans every time you use this attack. I don't think it's too strong, but it's pretty interesting nonetheless, and potentially like a one-of in some dark builds anyway, if you're already playing Yveltals. Next up we have Mr. Mime, and this is pretty much a reprint of the old Mr. Mime that we have. So that will round out the Pokemon. Let's move on to the trainers. First of all, we've got some tools. You can see in the middle there, Return of Floatstone, which is absolutely epic. I think this is going to be really helpful for things like Metal Rayquaza, even like Yveltal. Pretty much every deck appreciates Floatstone. It's also really good for Slurpuff. I think maybe even Toad Slurpuff could return in some respects. Losing that Floatstone was really painful for that deck, but it does make Slurpuff a lot stronger for a lot of different things. I mentioned Slurpuff as a tech in a couple of decks already, like the Noctowl, and I think I mentioned it in the Simi, Sage, Porum, Seer deck, and that could be an improvement to it as well. So overall, Floatstone is a great card in a lot of different decks. Even like Groudon appreciates it, so that's a real great improvement. We also see Assault Vest, and this does reduces 40 damage done to your Pokemon this is attached to from any of your opponent's Pokemon with special energy. And I'm sort of having a debate in my head, like, would I rather play this, or would I rather just straight up play Enhanced Hammer? And to be honest, it is sort of it's sort of what you want to achieve. Assault Vest seems more proactive. If it's something like a Night March or a Vespiquen, Assault Vest is probably preferable because instead of just enhanced hammering it away, you're normally going to kill the thing in front of you anyway. So being able to reduce that damage is actually helpful. However, if you're up against something like a Giratina, you're more likely to want to use Enhanced Hammer to stop the Chaos Wheel, for one thing, and also, like, it's not likely you're going to one-hit the Giratina without the use of Stadium's tools and specials, so the Assault Vest seems worse in that regard. So I think it's really kind of techy. You need to be certain that specials are going to be played in high enough capacity to make this work. At the moment, specials are everywhere, so Assault Vest is very nice. But overall, would you play this over Hard Charm? I think Hard Charm's definitely safer in general. Like I say, it depends on the amount of specials that are being played right now. So it's one to look out for. I think for the most part, Hard Charm's safer. And in a lot of situations, you're going to want Enhanced Hammer over Assault Vest. Because if you play Enhanced Hammer, it means you can play a different tool, like a Muscle Band, which can help you out. So Assault Vest, unfortunately, has to compete with a bunch of very powerful tools that we have already. And if you're putting Assault Vest on, it means you can't have access to, Floatstone or Muscle Band, or even Hard Charm if you want to be tanking. One of the two is a bit of a debate you have to have. Another new tool is Heavy Boots. I think this was pretty much made from a champ, pretty much. If the retreat cost of this Pokemon... is 3 or more, it has 20 more HP, and it can't be confused. 20 more HP, I don't think that's too good. I think I would rather have Hard Charm overall. But for Machamp in particular, it can help your first attack that does 20 times the amount of damage counters on you. And having the ability to not be confused does improve Machamp's second attack as well. So that's pretty cool. It means that once you use your second attack, you can put the Heavy Boots on so that you can guaranteed use your second attack again. You don't have the Heavy Boots on first because it means you can't be confused, or you can't have a special condition on you. So overall, I think, Machamp isn't that good anyway, and Heavy Boots doesn't improve it all that much. So it's not a very playable card overall. We do have the Spirit Links. I'll just show them off for the artwork. We know what the Spirit Links do, but pause now if you're a collector and want to see some more of those links. Next up, we have some reprints as well. Unfortunately, they don't have the scans for the new Super Rod and the new Heavy Ball. These are obviously the old ones that we're familiar with, but the text is the exact same, so I'll just quickly brush over these cards. Town Map is good for Night March and just any deck that... a lot of people just like playing Town Map in everything. It's kind of good in like Maxi and Archie based builds to know exactly what's in your prizes. Super Rod returning is really good for a whole lot of different things. I think it outclasses Sacred Ash in almost every deck that I'm playing right now. So yeah, Super Rod's a lot better. Heavy Ball, it's nice for like Toad Tina. It's nice for metal decks. So I think that's a nice inclusion as well. A couple of new items that we have. The first is on the left. That's Reserve Ticket. You get to flip a coin. If heads, search your deck for a card, shuffle and put it on top of your deck. So on a coin flip, it's like a computer search that you get the following turn. But it does combine with Unknown to be a coin flip for a computer search, which is kind of okay. You never really want to play a card that on a coin flip does nothing. But, there's still stuff like Super Scoop Up, which sees a lot of play. There's still Crushing Hammer, which sees a lot of play. And Reserve Ticket, it seems like if you play Unknowns, it could be strong enough to play in something like a Night March deck, where you have the space to play around with it. Obviously, we have Shaman as well, so Reserve Ticket can be like, on a coin flip, find your double colourless energy, and then you Shaman, and you get it into the hand to use it for Night March. So it's almost like reasons why people play Teammates in Night March and Vespiquen and stuff like that. Reserve Ticket could be a more proactive option to getting out the specific cards that you need at the right time. Now, in terms of space, I don't think you can have space for like a full 4 of these, because there's better cards to get you there, like Trainer's Mail and stuff. But it's mainly, in my opinion, to try and find the special energy, which we don't have a lot of search for. So it'll be interesting to see where Reserve Ticket falls into our format. Next up is Buddy Buddy Rescue, and I'm really not a fan of this card at all. I keep trying to think of situations where this is going to be helpful. Each player puts a Pokemon from his or her discard pile into his or her hand. Like we have Revive, we have Max Revive. They both seem stronger without the cost of giving your opponent a Pokemon back. The only reason I can think of is if you need to equal out your hand size. If you're like a Noivern or a Glalie deck, you force them to pick up a card, and then you put one into your hand, but maybe it's something you can insta-play. So it really doesn't seem too helpful for me. I'm not a fan of that card. Here are the supporters. I've already discussed Bridget a little bit, but this is a pretty good supporter, I would say. Search your deck for either 1 basic EX or 3 basic Pokemon except for EX and put them onto your bench. Shuffle your deck afterwards. I think it's kind of okay, you know, really good for, like I say, these Bats decks. Very helpful for like Raichu Bats. Obviously the Gengar is probably going to use it. Even the Magnezone can profit from this, so I feel like Bridget will see quite a bit of play. It does seem reminiscent of Pokemon Collector from way back when, but it is weaker because you have to put everything on your bench. But you also have the option to get an EX, so that can help you out as well if you're playing a combination of non-EX and EX Pokemon. Like if you're like a Bronzong build, maybe early on you just want to flood the field of Bronzors, and then later on in the game you want to use Bridget to find yourself an Aegislash. It has some versatility to it, which I quite like. Next up is Fisherman. Fisherman allows you to put 4 basic energy cards from your discard pile into your hand. It's a superior energy retrieval without the discard, and it's a supporter. Like I say, I think it's going to be used in Magnezone, definitely because we have VS Seeker, so you just need to play the 1, really. That's a pretty helpful card. It could also be used in Expanded for stuff like Blastoise. But overall, if you have Superior, I don't really see why you're not playing it. We do have the return of Skylar, and I've gone over an absolute bunch of Stage 2 cards. And I think Skylar returning is really good for that, because it can help you find either the Ultra Ball or the Rare Candy, these combo pieces that you need to actually get these Stage 2s up online. And I feel like Skylar is a godsend for all of those dudes, so that's really nice to see it return. We also see the return of Judge. Each player shuffles his or her hand and draws 4. Seems like a pretty weak in terms of a draw supporter, also pretty weak in terms of disruption. It's kind of a mix between the two. Obviously it helps the Noivern and the Glalie, and if you are playing stuff like Octillery, it seems like it's disrupting your opponent more than it is you disrupting yourself. So overall I think Judge will see some play in these different decks, so it's one to look out for. So another new supporter is Giovanni's Scheme. I almost actually forgot about this card, I've just thrown it in. Giovanni's Scheme is an interesting card. You get to choose one of 2 effects, which already fascinates me. I think already it makes me want to play this card. But it really does depend on how strong these effects are. So you get to draw until you have 5 cards in your hand. That seems, you know, relatively weak. It's weaker than Bianca, and that basically never saw play. And then we see the other effect. During this turn, your Pokemon's attacks do 20 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon before applying weakness and resistance. And this is like the Iris supporter that we had, and that was never played either. So it's choose 2 effects which seem really subpar, but the fact that we get to choose between them makes me kind of like this card, even though the 2 effects are fairly subpar. I've said a lot of the time, like, oh, Glalie with a Muscle Band would be great. Well, now we have a VS Secretable Muscle Band in the form of Giovanni's Scheme. So that's pretty cool, because if we do have it in the early turns and our hand is really dead, we can just choose to use the first effect to draw 5 cards again, and then Giovanni's Scheme is in the discard pile from then on for whenever we need to do that extra 20 burst damage. And, you know, everyone's playing Muscle Band right now. That extra 20 is relevant often. So having the VS Seeker combo to get that Giovanni's Scheme into play, get that 20 damage to finish off a game, I feel like it's pretty nice. And it might be one of these supporters that we start seeing more and more as a one-of, just because we are playing stuff like Compressor, VS Seeker combo to fish him out whenever we really need to. Like I say, the fact that he has these dual effects makes me like him a lot more, when if this card had just one of either of those effects, it would be absolutely garbage. Just having the choice really makes me fascinated by this card, and it's one that I feel I will try out in a couple of decks where that 20 damage is very relevant. For example, in Glalie. Next up we have 1 stadium, but it pretty much is 2. Parallel City is pretty much a new mechanic. It's very awesome, and it acts differently depending on which way you turn it. That's why you can see it's the same card on the left and the right, but I flipped it each way. So if the red side is facing you, so like the city, the urban area is facing you, any damage done by attacks from this player's side, their grass, fire, and water Pokemon is reduced by 20. So if your opponent is playing a grass, fire, or water deck, you can face it on that way, and their damage is doing 20 less to you. That's kind of okay. Normally, though, this is the side that you want to put on yourself, because the other side of the field, the one that's more sort of green and you see the big tree there, you get to the player this card is facing. If they have more than 3 bench, they can't have more than 3 bench Pokemon, and they have to discard if they have more, obviously, going back down to 3. So this seems very, very painful for a lot of decks. Obviously, things like Rayquaza and Raichu that need the output based on their bench. Stuff like Bronzong, where they need the space for both the Bronzong and their techs. A lot of different decks like having the spread. Bat decks, like I was talking about, Bats and Gengar, limiting them to 3 bench slots seems very, very painful. So I feel like Parallel City could be very strong. Then there's the inverse effect, where maybe you want to go absolutely turbo, and you end up slapping down 3 Shaymins on your bench just to get a fast setup. Then you can slap down Parallel City, discard all those Shaymins so that they're not just Lysander targets later on. So Parallel City does seem like an absolutely great card. I feel like some decks could even just splash it as a one-of, because there'll be a point in the game where Parallel City can benefit you or really pain your opponent. I think it's a very strong card, even as a one-of in just random decks that can fit it. If you are a grass, fire, or water deck, and that 20 damage is very relevant, you may have to think twice about it. We do also have to think that there's a lot of playable stadiums for other decks that are like absolutely essential. Like if you're playing a Psychic deck, most of the time you want Dimension Valley. If you're playing Manectric, a lot of the time they need to have that Rough Seas to help that healing. So some decks don't have the option to play Parallel City, but maybe something like Yveltal. In Standard, we don't have Verbank Laser anymore, so Parallel City could sneak its way in quite nicely. Also, you got to consider Ninetales and Giratina. Ninetales being able to lock Parallel City into play, forcing your opponent to only just like to keep 3 bench Pokemon is pretty painful. And of course, Chaos Wheel stopping your opponent from replacing the stadium as well could be a vicious lock. You're locking half their field as well as half the cards that they can play from their hand. It seems very painful and a bit of a buff to Giratina overall. So Parallel City seems like a very playable card in the right sorts of decks and at the right times. Finally, we have one new special energy. There's also the Rainbow Energy, which gets a reprint, but I didn't really feel like discussing it. So Burning Energy is the new special that we have, and I discussed it when I was talking about Mega Houndoom, and for some reason I didn't put the picture of Houndoom in here. I probably should have. But yeah, if this card is discarded by the attack of a fire Pokemon, you get to reattach it from the discard, basically. So effectively you're not discarding the energy, which is pretty cool. You'd have to worry a bit about hammers, but I guess it's something to really consider. A couple of other cards that this can work with. I think it does work nicely with the Mega Houndoom, but it also works quite nicely with Camerupt EX. Explosive Jet does 50 times the amount of fire you discard from from all your Pokemon in play. So having Burning Energy to recover these fires, to basically make your Explosive Jet seem a little less expensive each turn, can be pretty helpful. It means that like every time you recover a Burning Energy, that's 50 damage that you have for the very next turn, as long as Camerupt isn't knocked out. So it seems pretty strong. Don't know how strong Camerupt is still going to be, because his attack is still very expensive. In Expanded as well, Quad Reshiram has been a deck floating around for a little while, and Blue Flare being able to forcing yourself to discard energy, Burning Energy recovering those can make it a little bit nicer. So yeah, something to consider. I don't think it's all too playable, maybe 1 or 2 in your Houndoom deck, but it is, weak to Enhanced Hammer, so there is a bit of a worry there. Obviously you can't play it against Giratina, so at the moment there's a lot of special energy hate in the format, so you have to be careful about playing this Burning Energy, because fires already have a lot of acceleration with Blacksmith and stuff, so I think it's not too overpowered, but it might be one that sort of sneaks in 1s and 2s rather than 4-ofs in all of these fire decks. So that is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this monster set review. I had to take a couple of pauses here and there so hopefully I can edit it so it seems fairly smooth overall. But yeah, a lot to talk about. I lost my voice about 3 times, so please excuse that. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this set overall, and maybe some of your favourites as well. I'll be coming out with a top 10 list as well later on this week, so that's something to enjoy. But for now, it's been Joe from OmniPoke. I hope you enjoyed this set review. Like I say, leave your comments down below, and leave a like for this monster video as well. If you stay to the end, you deserve it. So yeah, thanks very much guys, and I'll see you in the next video.